Okay, my name is Doyle Johnson. I was born in Doddridge, Arkansas, which is, of course, in the South in Jim Crow era, during the Jim Crow era, um, and in 1947, March of 1947, and I moved to Detroit around 10 years old, 1957, I believe.
And do you have more, and what is your connection to Black Bottom?
Okay, my connection is Black Bottom. When I moved to Detroit, I actually lived and Shane, which is just north of Black Bottom. I would think that the Gratiot Avenue is like the cutoff spot. But every day I walked to elementary school on the corner of Arndt and Joseph Campo. I'm sorry, Arndt and MacDougall, which was Novell Elementary. When I graduated from there in 1960, I immediately enrolled in Miller Junior High School, which is on Shane and Antietam, I think it was, which is middle of what part of Black Bottom. And for there, I went to school for at least 3 years. So I stayed in the area for I guess I was there about 5 or 6 years, Black Bottom area.
And can you share a little bit more about, you mentioned like Jim Crow South. Can you share more about your family story of why they came to Detroit?
Okay, I was born literally in the backwoods of Arkansas in 1947, and I started school down there. I went to all black school, and the particular black school that I went to is a Rosenwald school. You'd have to Google if you don't know about the Rosenwald connection, which is a Jewish merchant out of Chicago. He president of Sears, and he built black schools in the South for us because we were discriminated against. And he built several schools in the South, and I didn't know that I went to Rosenwald School until I heard the history of the school several years ago at a reunion in that area. But anyway, I experienced, of course, obviously racism, going into a store and being addressed by the N word as a 4-year-old. I didn't know what that meant, but I asked my grandmother, and she said, I asked why was I being called out of my name, and she said, well, just don't go in there anymore. She didn't explain to me what racism was about. However, I was in the South when uh, Emmett Till got killed, the Little Rock Nine. I was just 150 miles from Little Rock Nine when that happened. Um, and so I would get on the bus from time to time with grandmother going from point A to point B up and down the main highway. And as soon as we got on the bus, of course, we had to go and we paid our money at the front and we had to go immediately to the back. And when I remember my last time coming to Detroit at 10 years old in Shreveport, Louisiana, I got on the bus. My grandmother had not warned me to go to the back. And I got on the bus. I sat three seats behind the driver because there was an empty seat there. And immediately, a light-skinned black man from the back came up front. And he said, "Listen, son, you can't sit there. You have to move to the back." And he pointed to the sign and said, "Colored only." Yes, it said colored only. He said, "Once you get past the Mason-Dixon line in Memphis, Tennessee, you can move up front." And I did just that. So once I got to the north, of course, it was a culture shock, seeing the street lights and pavement. I never witnessed that before. I could go into a little room and push a button. I press a lever and water went down. The toilet. I'd never seen that before, and you know, so because obviously I lived in an environment where there was no running water. We had what they call an outhouse. The lights, our lighting consisted of uh, um, a kerosene lamp that my grandmother would light at night, which was a very dim lighting. But I endured. Something that I had to adapt to, and I had nowhere to go but up. I was already on the bottom, living in the environment that I was living in. So I came here. I did pretty good in school. I ended up being the president of the graduating class at elementary in 1960 at Normal. I ended up being the president of the graduating class at Miller in 1963, which I think you talked to George Williamson. George and I were in the same classroom. We were in what is known as the honors class because we excelled in our academics. And I remember the area very well. There were a lot of black shops. beauty shops, little small grocery stores. They call them confectionaries. A confectionery. I don't know if you came across that word in some of your interviews or whatever, but it was like a little candy store. They had candy and maybe pop and cookies. You go in there with your nickel and come out with five pieces of cookie because it was like a penny a piece. Candy was like two for a penny. That kind of stuff. And we didn't have a lot of places to go for recreation. Recreation consisted of the YWCA and YMCA in downtown Detroit. And what they would do, when I say they, I assume this was a city or whatever, would give us free memberships because we come from an impoverished environment. They would give us free memberships. So I learned to swim at the YMCA down on Elizabeth Street, downtown Detroit. And I interacted with other people in the neighborhood. We, you know, played little league baseball at Belle Isle, formed in the community, and basically that's it. Unfortunately, there were bullies. There were bullies in the area. I must tell you about that because two gangs I remember. One of them was called uh, the Mad Russians, and there's this guy, the head of it. His name was Charlie Goo. Now I don't know if that was his real name, but that's what everybody called him. And then he also was in a gang called the Blue Jesus and his disciples. You can believe that. So this is all actual, and you can ask others about this that were witnesses, and they can tell you what I just told you. And unfortunately, I was on the uh, receiving end of several bullying incidents at Miller. Um, Charlie would come up, and somebody would point out because remember we were in a honors class, so unfortunately, those that had not achieved like we had, perhaps were somewhat jealous, and they would point us out, coming out of school and everything. The bullies would come up there and would hit me in the mouth, knock me down, and my books laying all over. The kids are laughing and everything, so I picked up my books and walked on home. So I had to do that several times, and but like I said, I got I mean, I got away from it. So, later on in life, I thought back, perhaps if I'd have went a different direction from school, maybe what might not have encountered that, but it happened. So it is what it is. And other things I remember about the area, maybe I'm going a little too fast, but there was a Silver Cup Bakery on the corner of Verna and Shane. Again, I don't know if you've been told about this or not, but when you came south from Shane Street, crossing Gratiot, heading towards Miller, you start to smell this bread. I mean, it's like, wow, it was overwhelming, smell of bread. So that's something we look forward to every day also. So that's part of my little story.
Yes, thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
And you started to talk about what it was like growing up in Black Bottom. Can you say a little bit more about what were your neighbors like and what were some other important places to you when you
Okay, well, let me tell you about Black Bottom. First of all, almost every male that was once they turned 12 years old, I won't say every male, but quite a few of the males, and I still talk to them this day, we all had paper routes. And so with the paper route, we were paid like, I don't know, 1 or 2 or 3 cent a paper or whatever. But we encountered, because, remember you're 12 and 13 years old, so you don't have the maturity of a 20 or 25-year-old, right? So you're dealing with the public that are very mature, or they're much more mature than you. And some of them actually took advantage of you. And I was one of those. Well, what I mean by taking advantage, you deliver papers for a whole week and you come to get paid on a Saturday or Sunday or whatever to collect your money. And it was only like 30 or 40 cents or whatever. Some people would tell you, well, paper boy, come back next week. I'll pay you next week. Well, a lot of times next week turned into 3 weeks, and in 3 weeks, they still didn't pay you. So all of a sudden you cut them off from delivering the paper, but they still owed you money you never got. So that was one way. And I remember one day, uh, uh, this guy rode past, well, I had my wagon, my papers. I was pulling past his car, and I knew his brother. His brother and I went to school together, but he asked me for change for $1. So I gave him 4 quarters. I never got the dollar. He immediately when I gave him the money, he pulled off. So that was a form of robbery, I guess. But these are things that you don't forget, of course. And other things. when you have a paper route, you end up interacting with all kinds of people and different ethnic backgrounds and that type of thing. And for the most part, I enjoyed having a paper route because on Christmas they gave me, a lot of my customers gave me tips and everything, which I look forward to. And they also would. I came up with the idea of delivering papers that when it rained, I would put your paper inside the door, so it would not get wet. And of course, I was told more than one time, "Hey, I appreciate you doing that." It's common sense for me. But life in Black Bottom was it wasn't bad. I mean, we didn't know that we were in a poverty situation. I remember the number man coming around to the house, and almost everybody played the numbers. I mean, unfortunately, it is what it is. Can't go back and change history. So because everybody wanted to win that $50, $100, or whatever they were paying for that 2 or 3 cents that you were putting up. I also remember this in Black Bottom. This again might not come up in some of the conversation you might have. I remember the headlines being, and this would be in the late 50s, early 60s. The headlines were not in the papers were not somebody got killed or somebody got robbed or whatever. The headline was a whiskey steal just got busted over on such and such a street. You know, people were making illegal whiskey because again they had migrated from the South, and this is what they did in the South. So they brought the whatever up north. And those were the headlines. I remember seeing them over and over again as a kid. So, um, but the other people that we're associated with, we would, go over to their house and, you know, just talk out front or, maybe go to the movie together and that kind of stuff. And I remember my best friend, he retired several years ago. He, again, was at Miller with me. And we had we had formed this little club. I, and two other guys, and we call ourselves the Four Conservatives. Now, mind you, I didn't even know what the word conservative meant at the time, but I assume one of them, that named the group, did know what a conservative was. So anyway, we call ourselves the Four Conservatives. But never nothing structured. I mean, we would get together once in a while and just talk about, things in the neighborhood or whatever. No political, aspirations or that kind of stuff. But anyway, the one guy that I was closest to, well, one of the ones that was one of my best friends, who lived around the corner from me. We were from time to time. Remember, we were in a poor environment. So what we would do, like I might have bought a new shirt or whatever, and he liked the shirt. So what I would do, I wear the shirt today. I would come home and wash it, to let him wear it the next day, and vice versa. We did this kind of stuff. Now, mind you, this same guy ended up becoming an attorney later on in life. So we laugh about it now, what we had to go through back then. And of course, I've been self-employed since 1971 when I got out of the military in 1970. In 1971, I became self-employed. But another thing I should tell you, the life for Black families back when I came to Detroit was not, how should I put it? The men, it was hard for them to find a job, and the Black women for the most part worked in white people's houses, cleaning the house and taking care of the kids and that kind of stuff. My mother was no different. My mother had to do that. She said that she would get like $25 a week. That was her pay, but she was a live-in maid. I guess that's what you would call it. And so I don't know about other people, but I assume a lot of others had to do the same thing because there were no fancy cars. I don't remember seeing any fancy cars. We had a policeman that wore I forget his name, and I'm sure it's going to come up in some of your conversations, some of the people. But he worked out of the Huntsville station, black policeman, and unfortunately, they called him the HNIC because he was one that would go in the black neighborhood and rough up people or whatever. And he was well known. He's still in the history books, I guess, as far as Detroit is concerned. But he wore two pistols that were white handles. And back then, you had to look long and hard to find see a black policeman. They had you probably encountered somebody telling you about the big four. You ever heard that name before? If you
Oh,
haven't, the big four was four policemen. One was in uniform; he was the driver. The other three were in plain clothes or whatever, and they were all white, always white. That's all you saw. they would ride through the neighborhoods and, every once in a while they would get out and beat up a black person, I guess, for whatever they thought they might have been doing wrong or whatever. But anyway, it was known as the Big Four. And you might be able to Google that because that happened in our neighborhood quite a bit. On our side of town. I don't know a lot about the west side, but like I said, I lived on the east side and particularly right at Black Bottom. So that's what I knew about. And I did never heard about anybody getting killed, or I heard about fights. There were always fights. People get drunk, and you know, I remember one time a lady, and this is hopefully she lived, but back then they had if you had an emergency like a fire in the neighborhood or whatever, uh, they didn't have a 911. What they did was they had fireboxes on the street at different intersections or whatever. And if there were a fire, you would go up and pull this lever, and the fire engine, of course, knew where the lever was. Somehow they knew, had some kind of way of knowing. But they would come, to that area, and they see smoke. Of course, they know that's where the fire was. Well, one time, again, me as a kid, probably I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years old. I walked up to the corner of Shane and Pierce, and right now there's a post office there. But back then there was, uh, uh, buildings, businesses or whatever. But anyway, make a long story short, this lady, I saw her walking towards me, and she had been stabbed in her eye. And, I felt so bad for her. Obviously, she's been in a fight. So I pulled a lever, and of course, the fire engine got there, I guess, about 10 minutes or whatever, and took care of her. But, that was one of the things I remember, unfortunate, but hopefully she survived that. But other than that, we went to church, in the area. There were plenty of churches. We rode our bike up and down the street. I also remember this. Now, again, this is something else you probably won't have be told to you in an interview. They actually had horse-drawn carriages back then, and on the street. And this is through Black Bottom and rest of the east side. I assume it happened on the west side too. But somebody would have a carriage or a wagon where they're pulling vegetables, and the horse, they pull up in front of your house in the neighborhood or whatever, and you go out and tell them what you want. They will weigh it. You pay them, you take it back in the house. You also had the milkman coming around delivering milk and orange juice, in his little truck. I think a couple of names. One was Borden's, another was Twin Pines. Another one was called Field Test. All those were milk names back in the day. And at night, well, have you been told about the car parties?
The card parties, no.
Yeah, you haven't heard that. Okay, let me tell you what the car parties were. Okay, one thing that I've learned in my by the way, I'm 77 years old now, but I learned over the years that we as a culture have been very resourceful. I was told a long time ago that necessity is the mother of invention. And what I'm about to tell you, this is, is very, well, makes sense. It makes sense. What happened was, your rent might be, I don't know, $15, $25 a month or whatever. And if you had no job or whatever, it was hard to come up with that money. I mean, even then. So somehow, some way, and hopefully I've got this. I knew it happened, but I don't know exactly how it started. Other than the corn liquor, uh, they would start playing poker. They would have poker parties. And as I understand it, I never learned how to play cards, but I watched my mother do this over and over again. When the money is on the table, whatever they're betting or whatever, the house or whoever sponsors the party gets a cut of it. I don't know if it's 10%, 2%. I don't know how much it was, but I know they got a cut out of whatever was on the table that was gambled. Now, if they got $25, $30, for this poker party that they have this particular night, or usually on the weekend, on Friday or Saturday, that's what paid the rent. So that's the name rent party. So if you talk to older blacks such as myself around the city, they'll tell you, most of them know about the rent party, believe me. Because like I said, I participated in it as a kid because my mom would have me cooking 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm supposed to be asleep. I'm there cooking chicken and, feed, because her guests, they wanted to eat. So I guess she was charging them for it or whatever. But I remember seeing the poker party, the rent parties over and over and over again in our neighborhood. And I'm sure it's going on all over the country, all over the city. So that's another part of Black Bottom that, we witnessed. And I got my hair cut on Shane Street, Black Bottom. And Black Bottom, the part of Black Bottom I remember mostly was Shane Street. And that's running from Verna and Shane south down to Jefferson. I was in that area on a regular basis. Elmwood Cemetery. I used to walk past that from time to time, and I would walk down to Eastern Market area. There was a five and dime store there on Gratiot that we frequented on the weekend. Get your meats or whatever. I remember Paradise Valley, which I know you know about, and the one place that I remember is St. Edwine and Gratiot, because that's where my mother worked. There was a little small restaurant there. When I first came to Detroit, that's where she worked at. And I'm sure she was only making a couple of dollars a week or whatever working there, but I remember that. And I also remember the Flame Show Bar. Now, we're a little away from Black Bottom, but not too far. This is Forest and John R., I think was the area. And I would ride past there in our car, like Saturday night or whatever, and you see the black people going in and out. It was lit up like Las Vegas. I mean, the front of it, the marquee and everything was lit up like Las Vegas. And they called it Flame Show Bar. And you would see black women in their finery and their hats and gloves, white gloves on, and the men had on what they call spats. I don't know if you know what that is. That's a covering over your shoes, that they wore back in the day when they really dressed up. And they would have on their, nice suits and everything. And I remember that as a child because, again, it was amazing to me to ride past this place. It's all lit up and everything. See these people getting out of the cars, going in the building. And I remember one of the mayors back then was Mayor Mariani. And I think I don't remember his, if he was a good mayor or a bad mayor or whatever. I think he had some controversy behind him. I remember Kavanaugh. And I was living in the area at the time that they were in office. And of course, when a black person rose to be on the city council, I forgot the first city council we had. I remember when he was sworn in as the first city councilman, and we I didn't experience racism to the extent that I experienced in the South. However, I remember walking to church one day, and as I was about to get to the church on St. Edwine and Leland, which is where Children's Hospital is now, I'm walking from Pierce and Shane, and a couple of white guys in a car riding down the street, and naturally they yelled the N-word to me, and kept going. And then I remember another time I was walking the same street, this older white man addressed me as a boy. Mm. So I turned around and said, yeah, boy. I addressed him as a boy. I mean, I know now I'm very respectful, to anyone that's older than me, but he addressed me as a boy, which is talking down on me. I did the same thing back to him. So, but and you had like I said, people got along as far as I was concerned, and I was very respectful. Anybody I ran into, of course, I was taught to address women as ma'am and men as sir, older than you, and I carry that to the day, and I pass it on to my kids and grandkids. So that's I don't know if I went beyond what you wanted me to say,
Oh,
but
no,
anyway.
that's perfect. That's perfect. I actually have a couple follow-up questions. I can't
Okay.
remember if you said already, but do you remember the address that you stayed at? I think you
Oh, I
mentioned
stayed at
across.
3192 Pierce was the street that I stayed on. And I also stayed at, let's see, 3129 Shane Street, which is right around the corner. When I first came to Detroit, I was at 3129 Shane Street, which is right at Erskine, which is just north of, like I said, of Gratiot. And Gratiot is the cutoff point for Black Bottom. You probably know that. Gratiot and Mount Elliott and down to Jefferson. Yeah. So I didn't actually stay in Black Bottom as as you would call it, but I was in Black Bottom every day, because that's where my paper route was. That's where, I went to school. That's where my friends lived, so, and that's where we shopped in a black neighborhood. It was like I considered Shane Street, like I said, from Verna down to Jefferson, really be like a miniature Black Wall Street, because you know nothing but black businesses there. However, you had a few whites. And you had a Lowry Brothers Market, Lauri. They were in the neighborhood forever, and then they finally moved over on Gratiot and Van Dyke. Ultimately, but they started out down in, and you have a copy of the shirt that I gave you with all the black businesses on the back. So that would tell you a lot about a lot of them I did not visit and did not know about until George Williamson came to me one day and had me to put that shirt together. So he came with all those names. So, but yeah, and then I did not know the history, and I don't know if you looked up the history of Miller Junior High School. Well, Miller was a junior high school when it started, I think in the 20s, I think, and then it became a high school, and then it came, and then it went back to a junior high school in 1959, and I started the school in 1960, and I did not know that several of the teachers there at the time were participated in Olympics. One of them was Leroy Dews, which that's named after him. It's it sits on the west side of Miller School. Now they have this picture there, and name says Leroy Dews, and he was my gym teacher when I was there. There was a Will Robinson who used to teach there when Will Robinson went on to become a scout he went on to Pershing High School, won a boys basketball championship, and he ended up, his later career, he ended up being a scout for the Pistons. He came from Miller. There was Lorenzo Wright. He's another one that ran in the Olympics. You can Google him, and he was an instructor at Miller. You had a guy named Sammy G, who you won't hear about on a regular basis, but Sammy was on the basketball team at Miller, and I don't know if he made All-American or not, but I do know he played for the Globetrotters after he graduated from Miller. But I was at Southeastern High School, which is where I graduated from. He brought he brought the Globetrotter uniforms to school. You know, you got to be a believer. If he got all the Globetrotter, about 5 or 6 uniforms, you got to be a believer. He got them from somewhere. But I understand he actually played with the Globetrotters. You might know or might not know that Coleman Young, of course, went to Miller. Yusef Lateef, the jazz artist, he went there. Melvin Jefferson, who became the superintendent of Detroit Public Schools, he taught at Miller. He wasn't my instructor, but he was there when I was there. And also there was a Chapman. I can't remember Mr. Chapman's first name. He was also an instructor at Miller. And so we and even today, after all these years of us going to school and at that school, we find ourselves when we get together talking about that school because, first of all, the teachers were great. I mean, we learned a lot. They insisted that we, do certain things. Like Mr. Chapman insisted that you learn about Paul Laurence Dunbar, his poems and that kind of stuff. You had to recite them in his class. To get a good grade in his class, you had to recite certain things. And but they and then we get spanked. If you did something wrong, they had a paddle. Mr. Dews, matter of fact, had a paddle like I guess a lot of fraternities use now with the holes in it or whatever. And he called it the Green Hornet. He had it painted green. We would get punished. Now I do remember, and this is not something you'll probably report on, but I'm going to tell you anyway. We had a moment where we as boys, once we finished, and girls too for that matter. I don't know about the girls, but I know about the boys. When we would finish gym every day, of course, we had to undress and go take a shower, right? But we had this bath attendant. They had bath attendants back then. Apparently, it was perverted, and we didn't know what perversion, being perverted was back then until you got older. What he would do when we take our clothes off, he would stand in the doorway as we were going to the shower, and we had to crawl between his legs, and he would hit us with a paddle on our butt. I mean, he did this on a regular basis. Now you say, well, why didn't you say something? I mean, you're 13 years old. I mean, you almost take it as normal. He's doing it. He's an instructor. He's over us. So, we didn't say anything. And I'm sure he would have gotten fired or whatever if somebody had complained, but we never complained. But those are things that we remember. And we remember one of our teachers, Miss King, who people you interview might know, especially those that went to Miller. She had a drinking problem. So she's in there teaching math or whatever class subject was. And every so often you see her, she was in the basement. she would leave out of the room and go down to the boiler room and get her a nip, get her a little sip of whatever of alcohol or whatever, and so we remember that. We all laugh about it, but and see what else should I could. Oh, we had what they call truant officers back then, where if you didn't come to school in a certain amount of days or whatever, they had a person would actually come to your house to see why you were not coming to school. Of course, I guess that's not something they do now, but back then they would actually get in their car and go to your house to see why you as a child were not coming to school. Were you sick, or or you just skipping school or whatever? One other thing, as I'm talking to you, I'm remembering things that happened. One of the bullying incidents that happened to me. This wasn't Charlie Gould. This was another guy. His name was Big Otis. And I understand he ended up becoming a policeman. But in the day when I came along as a teenager, he was a bully, and we were on the corner of Shane and Verna one day, and of course it's Black Bottom, and he had made me give him my new sweater I just bought. And then he was getting ready to deck me. The kids are sitting around waiting for the fight and everything. He's getting ready because I was passive. I was very passive back then. I had no self-esteem at all in terms of, defending myself. And I really didn't get self-esteem until I got 11th grade in high school. I began to take karate. Then my self-esteem was sky high then. But anyway, but back to this incident. So he's getting ready to deck me, right? Getting ready to hit me. And it just so happened, just before it happened, there was a big man in a Plymouth car that was heading he was heading north on Shane from the school, and when he got to McDougal there, I mean to Shane, I'm sorry, to Verna, he made a right because he saw this crowd, and he pulled over to see what was going on. So when he got out, I noticed that he was the truant officer I was telling you about. Mr. Toomer was his name, Toomer. Anyway, he I don't remember him being a teacher, but he was like I guess part of the staff, I guess. But anyway, so he got out of the car and he came to this guy, Big Otis, and he says, "What's going on here?" And he noticed, I guess he had encounters with Otis before, and he told Otis, if you want to hit somebody, you hit me. Now remember, this man's about 6'3", 6'4", weighed probably about 300 pounds, so you can imagine, his stature was, overpowering to us as little small kids or whatever. So naturally, Mr. Toomer put up his fist as if to say, "Hey, you want to fight? Come on." And they danced around there for a second, but the guy never struck Mr. Toomer because I would have been committing suicide if he had him. But anyway, I remember that, and that's something again. It's something that happened to me that I'll never forget. And but now housing back then was mostly the outside was this, I don't know what you call the stuff, but it was like a siding, but it wasn't the type of siding you would see now, like aluminum siding, nothing like that. It was these little square blocks, and they were in sheets that you would, I guess, use nails to nail them into the your siding of your house or whatever. And if you saw it in now, you'd only see few because they don't make that. I'm sure they don't make that kind of stuff anymore. You did not have the gates, that you put on your door to keep people from coming in. You didn't have that because very seldom did you hear about somebody getting broken into or whatever. It just didn't happen. So that's some more of my story.
Thank you for
Oh,
sharing. Oh, go ahead.
well, let me tell you about this. Transportation back then, you had the bus lines, but you also had the trolley cars. And the trolley cars worked, it was an electrical situation where they had these electrical lines in the top of the street, and the trolley car would run down the middle of the street. It didn't come over to the side. I don't remember coming over to the side because because it was connected to electricity, so it could only move so far. And they were on rails, like train rails or whatever, and they would go up and down the major streets like Gratiot. They would go up Warren. I don't remember being on McDougal, but I know Gratiot, Warren, Forest. You had trolley cars, and that's one of the things that we rode. As far as getting around, you had back then. You didn't have you had what they call Briggs Stadium, which became Tiger Stadium ultimately on the corner of Trumbull and what is that, Michigan Avenue. So I remember going there for a football game once, a baseball game once. I wasn't heavy into sports then. I really didn't get into sports until I got into high school. Um, Another thing I remember about being in Black Bottom when I went to Norval. kids have a way of teasing you, if they don't like the way you look or say, you're fat or you're skinny or whatever, they get different names for you. And so I just happened to be chubby when I was going to elementary school at Novell. And one of the guys nicknamed me Jelly Roll. He said, because when I walked, I wobbled from side to side. Of course, made me mad, but what can you do about it? And the same guy that did this ultimately ended up becoming a criminal, ended up killing three people. He was one of the ones that was in the club I was telling you about, the more conservative, very smart academically, but a common sense apparently was lacking because I won't go into detail, but he ended up killing three different people before he died of a heart attack some time ago. And of course, the other three guys in the club with me cannot figure out what happened, but I know he was always jealous, of the lady he married. He was extremely jealous of her, and he was always, it had to be his way or no way, so those are kind of some of the personality traits that he had. But anyway, that's another story. Um, yeah, and food we ate back then, of course, we ate vegetables. Oh, let me tell you this too. I might as well tell you this. Um, as being, poor, obviously, I don't know any other way to describe it. I mean, we were poor, but we never went hungry. We never went without clothing. I mean, it wasn't the best of clothing. I remember doing my presidential speech in elementary school. My mother, by the way, was in the hospital for a year and 3 days. She had tuberculosis back then. They would put you in the hospital and keep you isolated for until they thought you were cured or whatever. And she ended up in uh, um, I can't think of the name of the hospital over there on Expressway. Anyway, they had a tuberculosis hospital back then. Um, but um, I uh, I ended up, because of her having tuberculosis, I ended up testing positive for tuberculosis, and I was told I'd always be positive because I was exposed to it, but I never actually had the virus or whatever. But I ended up testing positive. But I stayed with my stepfather, which wasn't great because staying with a stepfather at that time, this man was suffering from PTSD because he'd just come out of the Korean War, but nobody had diagnosed it back then. He would be real nice one day, the next day he was mean as a snake. And so he ended up, there's something else, another part of my life growing up. I ended up getting kicked out of the house more than one time at 12 years old. Now, can you imagine a 12-year-old being kicked out of the house? What do you do? Where do you go? Okay, well, I had sense enough. Let me tell you what I did. I had sense enough. Remember, I was delivering papers, so I had a few pennies in my pocket. At that time, they had theaters all over the place. You had two theaters in downtown Detroit, right where the Little Caesars Arena is now. One was called the Colonial, and the other one was called the Roxy. They were like right next door to each other. And what they showed movies, like a three movie, they continuously. It was 24 hours. You can go in there and maybe in the middle of the movie and wait a couple of hours, you're going to see the same movie all over again. So what I did was I would pay my little 15 cents or whatever and go in and sit in the theater, of course, go to sleep in the seats, get up the next morning. That's, once I got kicked out. And next morning I would go to school at Miller. And of course, my friends, I never discussed, what was going on in my home. And they didn't know, what was going on. When I got out of school that afternoon, my mother would come pick me up and take me over to my uncle's house. And that was my place of uh, whatever you want to call it, sanctuary or safe space or whatever. And he always took us in. He had a big family himself, but he never turned us down. Sometimes my mom and I both would get kicked out of the house. But like I said, I didn't understand it then. And after he died, I think he was about 31, 32 years old because he had epilepsy and he had a seizure and he died. But anyway, after I got older and I look back over my life, and I said, well, he suffering from PTSD. I understand why a lot of things that he did, because again, he just come out of the war, and unless you've been there, you wouldn't know. You probably wouldn't understand it. So, but anyway, so that's some more of the things I remember. We got mail on a regular basis, Monday through Saturday, always on time. You had the cab companies, you had a city cab, you had checker cab, had several others. And back then, when I first came here, you had all white drivers, but eventually blacks began to drive the cabs also. And you had another thing that you should remember back in the day in the 50s. prior to, technology, getting more modern than it was then. You had radios that were electrical. Of course, they plugged into the wall, but they had what they call tubes that had to be replaced every so often. They were like a light bulb. It's like a light bulb inside the radio, but instead of being a bulb, it was a bulb, but it actually ran your radio. If one of those tubes blew out, you had to replace it. Now, to replace it, you would go to the nearest drugstore, and they had, as soon as you walked in, they had this little platform there where you would take the bulb that you had and stick it down in a particular socket or whatever to figure out which one it was, and then that's the one you would buy. And you took it back to your house, put it in, radio started playing again. Now, TV, I remember, I remember the first remote control TV. Now, this is going to sound a little strange, but anyway, so when the TVs came out, um, at least when we got a remote control TV, what happened was you had a line that you plugged into, like a line you plugged into the back of the TV, and the line or whatever you want to call it was maybe about 20 feet long, I guess. So you're sitting on your couch pushing this button, and it would change one channel at a time. Back then, you had 2, 4, 7, and 9. That's the only four stations you could get. And at a certain time of night, 11 o'clock at night, they would go off. You would see this uh, pattern on the TV, and that would be there until maybe 7 o'clock the next morning. So you could forget watching TV at 3 o'clock in the morning. But we got through it. I mean, we endured it, so it was rough, but we got through it. So
And then you mentioned that there's a church that you attended too. What was the
yes,
name
the
of the church?
name of the church was New Canaan Baptist Church. Now, my mom was a charter member of that church, and matter of fact, my mom died January 1st, 2021, and she was 92 years old. So she was at that church for over, what, 70, 80 years, I guess, almost 80 years, I guess. And she was a charter member, and it was on the corner of St. Edwine and Leland. I remember it, and it was like what they call storefronts. In other words, what would happen is like a store perhaps went out of business or whatever. Well, a church would come in because it's already a building, it's got the four walls, of course, it's got the restroom, and they might have to do a little remodeling in it or whatever to make it, accommodate the people that were going to come. But it happened. So you had a lot of storefront churches. They were not built with the brick and mortar like you see now. So it was like a wooden building, 1 story, maybe about, I want to say maybe 20, 20, about 2,000 square feet, maybe. It wasn't real big, but it was big enough. And now, other things I remember about churches in the area, Reverend C.L. Franklin, who was Aretha Franklin's father, I never knew him, but I understand, well, there was some things that went on that you probably never be privy to, but that I was told, because see, a lot of the ministers, especially the big time ministers, and I had an uncle that was one of those. He had he's one of those. He got in the pulpit on Sunday morning and started preaching, the women jumping and shouting all over the place or whatever. But when the preaching was over, and he would, I mean, this is a fact. I know this for a fact. He would start chasing skirts, although he had 5 kids at home or 4 kids at home and a wife. That was his thing. Now, along with him, that was C.L. Franklin, that was the Reverend Caldwell. All of these were, they partied together and did their gambling or whatever together. But all you saw from 11 to 1 was the holy end of their whatever. I say a lot. People get real holy from 11 to 1 on Sunday. Other than that, they live a different life. A lot of them live a different lives. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, you had Prophet Jones. Have you heard that name before?
No.
Okay, well, Prophet Jones, and again, since you're recording this, you might want to go back and research some of this. Prophet Jones was, I know you heard of Reverend Ike, right? Reverend Ike? Okay, well, figure Prophet Jones here in Detroit was an original Reverend Ike. I mean, he was one that had a church on Dexter and on the west side. He was on the radio every week. And Prophet Jones supposedly said that he didn't go to church until God whispered in his ear, "Okay, you can go to church now. You can go," and might be 11 o'clock at night. His flock just loved Prophet Jones, and I was told that when you went in his church, he would lock the door, and before you left out, you got to put some money in the till. It might be a penny or whatever. You got to put some money in the till. And one time, I doubt if you're going to hear this one. He went out to Belle Isle. This is Prophet Jones, and he had told his flock he's going to walk on water. Have you heard that story before? You never heard that
No.
story? Okay. Anyway, he went out to Belle Isle, probably in a Cadillac, and his helper pulled up to the edge of the water and pull out the red carpet because you know you gotta show the red, you gotta have a red carpet when you walk on. So he walked up to the edge of the water. Now his flock is out there and they're jumping in a fever, you know. Yeah, oh. And so he turned around when he got to the edge of the water. He turned around. He says, "Do you believe I can walk on water?" Oh yeah, we believe. I mean, they went into a frenzy. Do you really believe? Yes, I believe. I believe. He said, "Well, since you believe it, I don't have to do it." He got back in the car and took off. Now, like I
Right.
said, I'm not the only one going to tell you that story. You ask some of the older people, they'll tell you about that one too. He was a real character. Then you had another one. You had a Reverend Otis, but Otis came along long after Prophet Jones. Another thing about Prophet Jones, he uh, he had his when his mom died, he had her brought into the church and put up there, I guess, in front of the pulpit or whatever. He wanted his parishioners to pray for her so she'd come back to life. Well, I don't have to
Wow.
tell you in on that one. But anyway, like I say, he was a character. He's on YouTube. You'll see some of his sermons or whatever on YouTube, and then you can read about him on Google or whatever. Um, but like I said, we had some characters here. You had a lot of bars. You had an Alvito bar. Alvito was uh, probably the first and only black bar that I knew of. They also had a car wash down on the corner of not Hastings, but Mac and where the Christ Expressway is. Now I remember when the freeway first came through. Now I didn't know anything about urban renewal. Going into the black neighborhood. Uh, Kicking us out. I didn't know anything about that until later years, but I do remember the Chrysler Freeway being built, and I remember walking actually down one bank across the freeway and up the other bank before they actually opened it to get to church. I remember doing that. I remember Hastings Street. I remember seeing the prostitutes down there and being solicited at 14 years old. Believe it or not. But um, but anyway, Hastings Street, of course, you've heard about Hastings. Hastings was full of black businesses also, and like I said, it was hard, but we made it. We made
And
it.
so how how did you learn about the plans to destroy Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, or what did you think was happening when you saw the freeway?
Well, I thought, believe it or not, I mean, because see, I watched I-94 being built too, and see, I-94 came along before 375 did, So I just thought it was another way. I mean, as a child or a young adult, no, I wasn't an adult then, but anyway, I thought that there was just something that they decided to put an area in there where traffic would move faster or whatever. I didn't think anything about the fact that they were uprooting black businesses or whatever, and black neighborhoods. I didn't know anything about that, because I wasn't one to read in the paper. Of course, you wouldn't have had articles saying, "Hey, they're destroying our neighborhood," unless it was in the Michigan Chronicle. It might have been in Michigan Chronicle. Now, going back to the Michigan Chronicle, let me tell you this: um, there was a man. Let me see. Longworth Quinn was the editor. I don't know if he actually started the Chronicle or not, but I know he was the editor for a long time before he died. His wife taught me at Norval. Of course, Norval's in Black Bottom. At Norval, she was I don't know if she was an English teacher, but I know auditorium. Every morning we went to auditorium, and what I'm getting ready to tell you now, this she repeated every day. Every day she did this. She would stand up in front of the class and say, "You must learn to speak distinctly. You must enunciate. You must." Every day she would do that. Now we're kids, what, 6, 7 years old? What in the world is this what we're talking about? So those of us that did start to speak like we should have, rather than using Black English or whatever, appreciated what she did, in guiding us back then. And I saw her in later life walking her mom. Oh, by the way, I could tell you this too. I was the first Black to have a retail store on Woodward Avenue in downtown Detroit, right across the street. Well, actually up the street from J.L. Hudson's. Now, if you do your research, you'll find that back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or whatever, there was a Sanders Bakery downtown. It was on Woodward Avenue. And I was right next door to them. And how I got there was when I got out of the military. I'm giving you a little background on me. When I got out of the military, um, my last 6 months in Korea when I was getting ready to get out, I took classes in business enterprise because I had been working in the factory just like everybody else before they went in the military, right? And so, but my determination, I said, hey, I don't want to have to be lifting steel for the rest of my life. So when I came back, when I took these business enterprise classes over there and started learning about business or whatever. So when I got back here, I enrolled in Wayne County Community College and ultimately ended up with a associate degree in business. And I started Wayne State, and I got 6 hours from becoming a senior. And the reason why I dropped out because there was a redhead, white lady, redhead, and I'm not racist or anything, but I'm just calling it like it is. And she said one day to a class, which was both white and black in the class, that blacks crave chitlins and the Polish people crave Polish sausage. So all of us of African American descent got up and walked out. And I said, wait a minute, I don't have to sit here and listen to this. And so I, at the time, I had started becoming an entrepreneur because I watched. I might as well tell you this story too, because it's part of Black Bottom uh, lore or whatever. There was a man named Chester Vaughn who died about maybe a year ago that started a business called Blackness Unlimited over on Ryan and 7 Mile, right behind Pershing High School. And when I got out of the military, of course, I was trying to find, what I wanted to do in life. And I thought about, I didn't want to have to work in a factory forever. So I got in school because I wanted to get a degree so I could have a white shirt and tie, walk around and impress people or whatever, and have me a desk job. So on my way to this, the entrepreneur bug bit me. And I watched this one guy going in and out. Back then, we had what is known as boutique shops, and they were all over the place. Boutique shops consisted of black light posters and black light bulbs. You'd have to research that to see what that's about. And they had weed papers because weed was big back then. They bought the weed papers and incense and records and that kind of stuff. So I saw him going in and out of these shops selling this incense and these little things that he was selling, a little costume jewelry or whatever. I said, well, he can do that. I can do that. So I called him one day and asked him what was his minimum order. He said, well, how much money do you have? I think I got $35. He said, that's enough. And so I went over and started buying from him. And then ultimately I was spending like $500 a week. Now, remind you, I'm still working in the factory, but I'm making more money, in the street selling to the boutique shops and stuff than I am in the factory. So, common sense say, hey, you might as well go with where you're making the most money. So as it was, I ended up selling to some of the same people that he was selling to. And so rather than have him get mad at me, I went to him and said, hey, I don't want you to get mad, but I'm selling to some same people you selling. And he said something then that's carried as has been part of my makeup for 50 some years now. He said, there's enough out here for everybody. In other words, he was very unselfish. And, and I learned a lot from him. And I spoke at his funeral and I mentioned what I just told you, that he was very unselfish and he helped me a lot. And because of him, that's why I went into business and still in business till this day. But I made it a point to try to meet politicians and pick their brain, business people. I picked their brains, and so that kind of helped fold me, get me to where I am today. And as of today, I've been to China 18 times. I just bought a ticket a couple of weeks ago. I'm going back again in October, and so you might want to ask me, well, why do you keep going to China? And I think I told you at the picnic at the little getaway we had that Willie Sutton back in the day when he was robbing banks, when the feds caught up with him, they asked, why do you keep robbing banks? He said, because that's where the money is. So I paraphrase that into why I go to China. I go there to get the merchandise to make money. So, but so that's that. Okay.
And so, um, how do you think, so do you think your family was impacted in any specific way by the destruction?
um, My family was not impacted because we had moved out of the neighborhood when this actually happened. I don't remember the exact year. I remember it happening. Now, I told you my mother actually worked in Paradise Valley, which the expressway, was adjacent to where she worked, and but she had stopped working there at the time and had moved on to something else. But I really can't tell you honestly any families that I know that were actually impacted because we're talking about I was probably in my late 20s or middle 20s or whatever when it happened, and I again, like I said, when I started my store in downtown Detroit, that was like, I want to say 83, 84, somewhere in there. And
Hmm.
I think they had already put the expressway in at that time. Um, so yeah, I don't think we were, directly impacted. I mean, we were impacted as a culture, but not individually for
Which is
us.
the question I have, which is how do you think Black Detroiters are impacted today by the destruction of Black Bottom and Paradise
Well,
Valley?
certainly we lost the businesses that perhaps could have been future generations of business people that could have taken over from their, family or their fathers or mothers or whatever. Because, like I said, there were beauty salons, there were, restaurants and barber shops and probably auto mechanic, places or whatever. So there could have been future generations perhaps from that. Um, of course, those that read about the history of Detroit, and especially in that area, you see the old pictures and everything, and it's kind of, I go back and look at that kind of stuff from time to time because I like history. But I, from that standpoint, but I'm one of those that because you're knocked down, Les Brown said, if you fall down, fall on your back because if you can look up, you should be able to get up. I'm one of those, So so I might have got knocked down in life, but I always made sure I got back up, and I'm sure a lot of people from that area did the same thing because I know several that have gone on to bigger and better things. Like I just told you about my buddy that became a lawyer. I mean, we were, wearing each other's clothes. Obviously, we were poor back in the day, but we, and then another friend of mine that she lived on Macomb Street. Her name is Althea Grant, and you can Google her name. She ended up being, and she became a social worker, and she ended up being in charge of the what do they call it? I forgot what they call it. Anyway, if a woman got raped here in the city, her office was one that investigated that kind of stuff. So she was working for the police department. She was in charge of that department for like 30 years, I think it was. And then she became a professor at Wayne State. I think she's retired now. But anyway, she lived in Macomb, right in the middle of Black Bottom, right across from what is it, Durfee Elementary, I think it is, Duffield Elementary.
Mm.
And so I used to walk over to her house and see her and her mom. And but like I said, we were at Miller in the Black Bottom at that time. I would consider one big happy family. I mean, we for the most part we got along except for the bullies. We got along. We respected each other, and we laughed and giggled, and I'm sure some marriages came out of unions from back then. And and by the way, uh, you have to do research on this too. I'm told that Miller in Black Bottom was built because the area was all white at one time, and so whites were. Remember, I told you high school because when blacks moved here from the South, the whites did not want us attending their schools. So Eastern High School was white, Northeastern. These are all schools on the east side over here. Northeastern. You had what other schools in there? Southeastern, of course. But so the Board of Education decided they want to build a school for the black kids, since we were moving this particular area. So you probably know this or whatever. But anyway, supposedly that's why they built Miller. And so when we came in, we started winning all the sports championships and everything. Of course, they didn't like that, but anyway, it is what it is. And like I said, we excel, and I'm so proud of having gone to that school. I wish I knew known about the history of it because they had an Olympic-sized swimming pool there, and but I didn't know as a child, going there. It was just hey, I just went to school there every day for 3 years. So, but that's part of my history.
And what do you think repair could look like for the harm that was done in the destruction as part of this I-375 reconstruction?
Well, the 375, I know they're talking about, redoing it and making it a park or something like that or whatever, which would be good. I mean, it's, for future generations. I mean, because they wouldn't have known anything about how that got started down there. But I think it would. But along with them redoing it, perhaps they should put historical markers, down there somewhere. And I think they're talking about that on Lafayette. I think I heard something about a historical marker being put down there. I forgot for what, but anyway. Um, and I think that, like I said, along with them, redoing it, they should emphasize, what happened down there, what, 40, 50 years ago, or whatever, so the future generations will at least, you're here now, but back then you were there. So,
Mm.
and, as we see the city is changing, we have, our population is coming back. However, Coleman Young told the whites to move past 8 Mile. But I'm thinking now, I don't have any proof of this, but those that you see moving into our neighborhoods now, and it's all, I live on Heidelberg Street, by the way, where the Heidelberg Project is. But anyway, I see 250,000 people passing down past my house every year, in the buses and cars or whatever. So there's interest in, Detroit. And these people, I've talked to people from Germany, I've talked to people from Holland, walking up down the street or whatever, and they're here for the first time and they saw it online. Hey, we had to come see this. But anyway, um, so if that interest is there, hopefully our kids and grandkids and great grandkids or whatever eventually will also, take some interest in, where we came from and what we had to endure, back then. So that's the way I see it. Now, that's not guaranteed, of course, but just because you put it in a book or just because you put it on social media doesn't mean that somebody's going to notice it or look at it. But hopefully, some will. And that's my thought on that.
Thank you. And what do you think is most important for future generations to remember about Black Bottom and Paradise Valley?
Well, first of all, they should remember how Black Bottom came about. I mean, and of course, a lot of people think of Black Bottom is because of, the Black people that moved in there, but I'm told it's because of rich soil is why they named it Black Bottom. But they'd have to look at the history of their family. I doubt there's any Black family in the city of Detroit that doesn't have, if you go back, 2 or 3 generations, that doesn't have some connection to the South. And I'm one of those that when I meet somebody new in the city, one of the things I always ask them is, you know, where did your family come from? Some of them say, oh, my mom and dad were born here in Detroit. Well, what about your grandmother and grandfather? Oh, they came from Alabama. They came from Mississippi. They came from Arkansas. They came from Georgia. So I doubt if there's any family here that can, if they did the research, can say that their family did not originate in the South. Um, now, um, if they look at that. I'm one. I would go beyond it because I'm an amateur historian along with amateur genealogist. I go all over the country, looking at Black areas, especially historical areas. I think I probably didn't tell you uh, I've been to Harry Tubman's grave in Auburn, New York. I've been to Frederick Douglass' grave and Susan B. Anthony. They're buried in Rochester, New York. And I often go to Sojourner Truth's grave, which she's buried in Battle Creek, and
Mhm.
she lived from 1797 to 1883, I think it was. And she spoke Dutch, but you'd have to do research. You can Google her and find out what's what. But anyway, I do this because I know that somewhere in there, and I just uh, you ever heard the name Bass Reeves? You know who that is? Bass Reeves.
No.
Okay, Bass Reeves was a U.S. Marshal, a Black U.S. Marshal that Judge Parker is known as a hanging judge. If you do the research on him, because he hung a lot of people, sentenced a lot of people to hanging. But anyway, Bass Reeves was born in Carrollton, Arkansas, and and you'll see in a minute why I'm telling you this. He was sent to the Indian Territories, which was Oklahoma at the time, and he had mingled. He was speaking 3 different Indian languages, so they knew he was right. Make you a marshal, and you go and catch the bad guys or whatever, and bring them to justice or whatever. And so in Fort Smith, Arkansas, they have this big statue of him and on a horse and his dog. They do a lot of justice to this Black man, Bass Reeves. And they have a series on Netflix now called Bass Reeves. But reason why I'm telling you this is because through my research and genealogy, I found that he's one of my distant relatives, and
Mm.
I'm so proud of him. And so I went to his museum, the museum down there in Fort Smith. When I went to, I was in, uh, I was in uh, New Orleans this past week, and I also went down to the Ninth Ward. I don't know if you ever had a chance to visit that, but that's, oh my goodness. But anyway, so I came on my way back. I stopped at Fort Smith, and there's a lot of history there because Trail of Tears went through there also. But I think that our folks would be better prepared for the future if we knew where we came from. That's my push. And if you're ever around me, you find that I'm always lecturing to people about, the future and AI taking over, and what kind of position you're going to play in it. Because another thing, let me tell you this now that I think about it. When I was at Miller, uh, a engineer from one of the big three to talk to us as black kids, black men, the black males. They had a assembly of all black males in the auditorium at Miller. And what they wanted to do was trying to get us interested in designing cars, because you got a younger mind. Of course, you're going to think a lot differently than an older mind, right? So they were trying to get us interested in that craft. And I don't remember everything that the engineer said, but I do remember what I'm getting ready to tell you. He said that, well, in the future, cars are going to drive themselves. Yeah, right. Now we're talking about 1960, now 63, 62, I think it was. Yeah, right. Because we were looking at Dick Tracy on TV, walking around with his watch on his hand, talking into the watch, and Get Smart talking into a shoe or whatever. And we saw the Jetsons flying around in a car in the air, that kind of stuff. So, naturally, hey, it was interesting, but we never thought that that would come about. Well, but here we are. So the engineer said, well, they're going to have it such that when you get on the expressway, you plug into the infrastructure, and it's going to take you wherever you want to go. Of course, they didn't know anything about GPS then, and they'll take you wherever. Yeah, right. Like that's going to happen. The car's going to drive itself. So I'm sorry.
Oh, I said we're closer than ever to that. I mean, we're at
Oh,
the
of course we are. Of
self-driving
course we
car.
are. But
Yeah.
there are people still doubters. They're doubters. But I tell people when I talk about AI, and I'm not an expert on this, but I do read a lot and I do a lot of research. When I talk about it, I say, listen, because it's just going to be a matter of time before some kind of technology is going to come where a woman has a child, and when that child comes into the world, there'll be some kind of an implant or something they'll know where your child is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because it's technology. And so you talk to people, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm not. I said, listen, that's not for you. You see in your time, that's going to be for your great great grandkids, because when they come into the world, that's all they're going to know. They're not going to know anything about a watch, a side view mirror, and certain things they won't even know because technology is moving so fast, and so I said, you do the best you can while you're here, and maintain your integrity, and try to be a good citizen, a good steward, or whatever, and going about your business. Try to pass it on to your offspring. But it's the world's changing.
Mhm.
So like you said, it's closer than we think. So that's my thought on that. So when I talk to people about what I see as the future, I have to mention AI and its place in our society or whatever. And I also predict that we as a culture might not exist as we know it now, say 100 years from now, and I'm saying this because we grow up in an environment where we take on what's around us, and my kids, both my daughters went to Detroit Waldorf School on the east side, and when we went to orientation, the teacher said, I mean, the overseer said, kids learn by imitating. And I never thought of it that way, but he was exactly right. So now our kids are learning from what they see on in the movies, on social media, what Pookie and Ray Ray are doing down the street or whatever. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of us that are pounding in these kids' heads. That's not a good thing to take on, for the rest of your life. You better try to figure it out. So, I'm a big advocate of anti-smoking, anti-drinking. I never drank, never smoke. I didn't mention that, but never use drugs. Here I am, 77 years old. I take one pill a day, and that's a cholesterol pill. A lot of people my age, I'm just letting you in on a little thing. A lot of people my age are walking around with oxygen up their nose and taking 15 pills a day, for kidney failure and heart problems or whatever. I've never seen that. I just never happened to me. And I'm thinking that my lifestyle to this point probably helped me get to where I am. And so, do I have something to say, or do I have something to pass on to others how I got here? Yeah, sure I do. Now, are you going to listen to what I'm saying? You don't know what you're talking about, old man. Okay, okay. So, but I'm always lecturing. I don't consider it a lecture. I consider it passing on my wisdom, like the old people passed on me, like my grandmother told me prior to me coming, Noah, you better learn to do things on your own because I'm not going to be here forever to, take care of you. Well, I told that to my granddaughter. She was 20 years old at the time. She says, but you're here now. That's okay. You're right. And I'm going to take advantage of you while I can. Okay. But so yeah, when I was in the South prior to coming north, I heard about. I didn't hear a lot about lynchings because we didn't have access to radio down there. Our word of mouth was from one neighbor to the other that perhaps it went to a neighboring community and heard something and brought it back to our community. Probably like the slaves got their information back in the day. So, but I don't hold my upbringing and my, the things when I got knocked down. I don't hold that against anybody because I'm in control of my own destiny, or I was in control of my destiny, and I try to tell people that. So those of us that came from Black Bottom, that that made it, of course, we're not. At least I'm not looking down my nose at others that didn't make it. And there could be more than one reason why they didn't make it. Could have been health issues. It could have been they weren't motivated. Could have been I don't know, lazy or whatever. I wasn't one of them. Never been lazy. Always trying to help each other, help someone. I give blood to the Red Cross. 77 years old, still giving blood because I'm healthy enough to do it. And when I get off that table, I've helped 3 people, which I feel good about. And that's another part of my life that I like to share.
Thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Is
not a
there,
problem.
we've reached the end of the interview. Is there anything else you want to get on record that we haven't talked
Well,
about?
well, I could say this. Only thing I could say is that I'm glad that George Williamson. I keep bringing up his name. I know you've either going to interview him or already interviewed him. He talked about doing a documentary on Black Bottom a long time ago, and it never came to fruition. But he talked about it. And my thought is, I'm glad that you and the organization you are aligned with are doing such. And obviously a much younger person than we are, and so perhaps those coming along behind you will, the work that you're doing and whatever you're going to be putting on paper or film or whatever, will in turn help them, in future endeavors, perhaps because of, and for that we appreciate. I'm saying we because I know that those that you won't even talk to, of course, they would be appreciative of what you're doing, also the efforts that you're making.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah,
Not a
I'm
problem.
excited to be building off of the work that folks have been doing for many, many years to keep this history alive. So I appreciate all the work that you've done and the people you're in relationship with to keep this story alive.
Well, like I said, I hope you keep up the good work, and if I can ever, help you in any way while I'm on this earth, I'm more than willing.